Well, speaking of Batman the animated series and, interpretations and bringing people together, let's get into, I think, the game that has basically changed how any superhero game is going to be made from now on, Arkham Asylum,
Yeah,
Batman.
that
Like,
was nuts when it came out.
I love that game still to this day. But it's like the story behind it's even interesting. Like you have Warner Brothers trying to make a Dark Knight game, and I think Pandemic was in charge of making it. That fell through because of something or other, and then they tried to be like, "Hey, Rocksteady, yeah, why don't you make a Batman game?" And I guess somewhere through the process, they're like, "This isn't working," and they said, "Just do, carte blanche, do what you want." And then you get, and they came together and they created this story. And isn't it based off of some Grant Morrison comic? I want to
Very
say.
loosely. The concept is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is pretty different. The Grant Morrison and Dave McKean, who is very well known for doing the covers to Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, wonderful artist. The two of them did a graphic novel in the late '80s called Arkham Asylum: A Serious House on Serious Earth, and in it, the Joker basically takes over the asylum and says, "Hey, Batman, like, come on in, and you can save the hostages if you just sort of, run our gauntlet." And so Batman enters the asylum, and it's a very cerebral story. It kept having flashbacks to Jeremiah Arkham, or Amadeus Arkham, rather, the original founder, who had imprisoned at one point or incarcerated his family's killer, and then eventually goes mad himself. And so you were seeing these flashbacks of the madness that had his family. And so there's the part of that story was the implication of, is this asylum sort of damned by the spirit of who created it? Is his madness almost like infecting the ground beneath it? And then the other aspect to it that was very interesting was as Batman's going through this gauntlet, there's a lot of religious imagery, there's a lot of mythic imagery, and a small implication that, not an implication, but rather just this using for symbolism, having each of the asylum inmates Batman encounters there reflect some part of his own personality. And so you could look at it metaphorically that Arkham Asylum is the house of Batman's mind, and these are all these different demons who want him to go too far one way or another, and he's constantly not. He keeps sane, and he looks into that madness, but he doesn't become part of it. And it also had some really great interpretations of certain villains, that like Maxi Zeus, and it had a new idea for the Joker, which Grant Morrison then repeated in different comics of his. And Scott Snyder has touched on this a little bit in his Batman comics, which was that there are comic book writers who like to ignore certain parts of continuity, and certainly comic book editors. This is why DC, to smaller degrees Marvel, but Marvel does it too, has reboots of continuity and reality where, oh, well, forget the Joker, the 50s and the 60s. That was a silly version of the Joker. So just, we're only paying attention to the Joker starting from 1975 on, because that's when he's a vicious killer, and da-da-da-da. And we don't know how to marry that idea with the goofy Joker of the 40s and 50s who was stealing paintings based on comedians and stuff. Grant Morrison, what he loves to do in so many of his stories is say, no, all of it happened. We just have to reinterpret how it happened or why it happened. And so in Arkham Asylum, a serious house on serious earth, it is referenced that the Joker has at times been not homicidal and more of the Romero Joker from the Adam West era, where he's sort of a prankster and stuff. And the psychologist mentions that in her mind, the Joker reinvents himself from time to time. And this is part of the chaos of his personality. And that he might be doing it in reaction to certain things around him. He might be doing it in reaction to changes in Batman's life. did he start becoming a clown after Batman took on his first sidekick and started hanging out with friends, i.e., the Justice League, only to then later decide, well, now the stakes need to be high again, and so he shifted back to Killer? Or is it possible that whatever chemicals warped his skin and his hair color also affected his brain, and he essentially is taking in too much sensory information?
Mm-hmm.
And so he guides himself by cutting off into certain paths of his and choosing, this is who I am now. And Grant has approached that idea time and time again. It was great. There was also a great scene, one of my favorite tragic Two-Face scenes, where the psychologists there are trying to wean Two-Face off his coin. And so they're like, well, the world isn't just a binary choice. And so they move him on to a pair of dice and then playing cards. And unfortunately, while they introduce him to the idea that, look, there are 52 combinations of what you can do, and then like start putting it into the like even the tarot eventually, where there's even more combinations and meanings, it also meant now that he couldn't go to the bathroom without consulting the cards first. And by the time he would get an answer, he'd already gone like in his pants and stuff. And Batman was like, one of the reasons I love the story is, while it's dark as hell and a mind trip, it is also repeatedly reminding you about Batman's compassion, which is something that some adaptations and a few writers forget sometimes. And like, Batman has to have compassion, or else he would be just killing criminals instead of taking them to prison or an asylum. We repeatedly see in the stories he wants people to reform. He hopes they get better. He hopes Harvey gets better. He doesn't want Dick to be like him. He doesn't want Tim and Jason and Damian to be like him. He wants them to be better and more heroic and not fall into the darkness that has infected him partly. And in that story, you see he has this great compassion and is very judgmental of the psychologist. Like, are you actually helping Harvey, or are you just worsening his condition? You know, are you just experimenting on him? Like once you saw this consequence, why didn't you stop? Like, why are you still continuing with this form of therapy? And in the end, like, gives him his coin back, because like, yeah, this means I have to fight Two-Face again, but at least he's not helpless and like this pitiful man-child. So yeah, it's this incredible story, and I definitely recommend folks read it. And then the video game just took sort of that basic premise and went in its own path, obviously, because they needed to make a video game, and so they made it a very different, wider spanning story. They also placed it in a different version of Arkham that by that point had been developed, where Arkham's on more of an island, and as has been established in the comics, and in this case was this multi-building facility and all that jazz, and had been also slightly reformed to have prisoners in there as well from Blackgate, and it turns out the Joker arranged that. But aside from the premise, the other link that it has to the graphic novel is that if you are a gamer who's into side quests and such, if you're looking around and keep finding those artifacts that tell you the story of Amadeus Arkham, you are piecing together the same origin story that Grant Morrison conceived and wrote for the original graphic novel.
Yeah, and that's what I think is the best part about that game, because like, even beside, take out Grant Morrison and the whole, like, you know, Arkham side story, you get into the Riddler trophies, you get into the Riddler riddles when, you know, you got to scan certain objects, and you get like Quincy Shark hints towards Killer Croc, and then you get into like the tapes and all that. And it was
the tapes are great.
Yeah. Oh, they're fantastic.
Yeah, the psychology tapes where you're actually hearing therapy sessions with the Joker, with the Scarecrow, with like that. See, again, that shows a care, because that has nothing to do with the immediate game, with the exception of one of them. But it's all just there
to build this world.
To build this world, to get you into this world. If you have never read a Batman comic before, oh man, you know the world pretty damn well by the time you finish that game. And you have a sense, not just Scarecrow first appeared here, and this is what he does, and this is who he is, but how does Scarecrow think? What drives him? What entertains him? And that's part of what makes that game fantastic.
And then you get into the sequels of it, though. I think Arkham
Yeah,
City is great. Arkham Knight, I think, is where it kind of dips.
Arkham Knights is very frustrating to me because, well, like so Arkham City, uh, the premise is a little bit more ridiculous. It sort of
Mm-hmm.
dips into that no man's land story from Batman, where Gotham just got so screwed up and ravaged by an earthquake that certain supervillains uh, then pushed Congress and manipulated Congress to basically say, you know what, screw Gotham, we're not rebuilding it, we're blowing up the bridges and abandoning it. And so Gotham for a year was left on its own, and it was gang warfare and stuff. And it's like it it's such a ridiculous premise. Not only if you consider, but people like Superman and the Justice League exist,
Mm-hmm.
but that the government would totally give up on us once if there are still people there, that they would prevent those people from leaving. Like abandoning a city, fine, maybe, but just leaving the people there and saying, "No, you can't even use the bridge. Screw you." It's like, what?
Lost
What?
Cause. Lost Cause.
Yeah,
Blow it up.
this is like, in the Blade Runner world that could work in something
Mm-hmm.
where you're trying to make it resemble the modern world we live in. We're not quite that far gone. So Arkham City, the idea being that the worst part of Gotham City has now been converted into a big prison yard, is fairly ridiculous, but it's a fun game. It's a
Yeah.
fun game. It's got a fun open world aspect to it. I like the side quests with Zaz and some of the others. I like that you could get to play some levels as Catwoman.
Mm.
Actually, the the only things that I really criticized about that game was I thought the ending could use a little work. Um, I don't think in storytelling in general, I'm not always a fan of twists that seem to be there for the sake of being twists.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
You can go ahead and spoil it if you want. I mean,
oh
it's
no, just some of the villains involved and stuff. Like it just like oh well, it turned out this was Ra's al Ghul the whole time, or like and this other thing. Like, but does that really add anything to this narrative? Like, um, it's if you have a twist, like give me some emotional stuff behind it. Uh, some of the side quests I wish were stronger.
mm-hmm.
But it
the
was a fun
best.
open world.
The best one I loved, and this was what kind of made me sour on Arkham Knight a little bit. But the best one, and that was, I think, the best, and that I can say the best anymore. But Hush was great. The one with Hush, oh, that was a good build up.
I like that build up. I was just as disappointed that once you confront the villain Hush, he then just kind of leaves.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, bye now. It's like, well, wait, don't I get something here? Like maybe they should have made that a DLC and like had a battle or something.
I always thought that they were going to do something in the next one.
See,
And
that's
they
the thing.
did,
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, well, it's like you also have a side quest with Azrael,
mm-hmm.
which was really cool, but again was sort of this implication of we will come back to this, and then they don't, and so there are these hanging threads, which I keep thinking like, well, honestly, guys, like if like even if you didn't know though that the third game wouldn't do this, I also get suspicious of games that have too many hanging threads. Just like I get suspicious of too many movies, like The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Mm-hmm.
Half that movie is just to tell you there'll be other movies later. And in fact, there weren't any. But even if there weren't, you weaken that movie by doing that repeatedly. Like, oh, the cool stuff comes later. No, you got to give me some cool stuff here. You can hint at one or two things. Don't hint at so much. But I mean, Arkham City is still fun. Like the only other thing is, I actually talked with Grant about this a while back, where because of how big Arkham City is, because they decided to make the entire open world that's open to you this city that's been converted into a prison, as opposed to, hey, these 5 blocks are the prison, and then the rest of this is just Gotham City.
Mm-hmm.
You just look at like, wait, they were willing to abandon how much of the city to just be a prison, and also the water is green at times, and it's just like, and Grant was sort of joking, it just sort of looks like hell. Like if Gotham is this damned, what is Batman doing? And it's just one of those things that you sort of, it doesn't ruin the game for me by any stretch, but it's something that I'm very aware of, and I just sort of suspend my disbelief and chuckle at.
Well, I think that's at a certain point you got to think here, like, why would you live in Gotham at a certain point? You
Well,
know?
this is again how you get into how certain writers depict it and how certain like because there are writers who like Batman animated series show that Gotham has a lot of crime, absolutely, but
Mhm.
they also show there are lots of good people working to improve it, and also they show that it is noticeably improved since years before, and you see like people rebuilding communities like in the 90s and 80s. Alan Grant, one of the big Batman writers at the time, would not just show Batman fighting as Bruce Wayne, but would not just show Batman fighting crime, but also showed Bruce Wayne going to schools and offering
Mhm.
scholarships and helping clean up the inner city neighborhoods and reaching out through philanthropy because he wanted to truly improve Gotham and knew you don't just do that through violence. You have to improve the infrastructure. You have to inspire the community. But then you have some Batman writers and editors who will argue there should be no hope in Gotham. This should look like a mad architect built it as a home for gargoyles and demons, and like deliberately put in as many dark alleys as he could so that it would be easier for later generations to mug people. Like and so you've got these two sort of warring ideas, and I think that hell on earth idea can work as the starting point.
Mhm.
But if in the timeline Batman's old enough now that Dick is Nightwing and Tim is Robin, as happened in Arkham City, um, there's got to be some blocks that are
Improvement.
fine. There's got to be some blocks that are fine. There's got to be like criminals have to have some general fear. It can't truly be overrun with just evil.
Mhm.
Um, because you know what? Then Gordon's not staying. Then Tim's not staying. Half the population is just going to leave, and it will just become a ghost town.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, like I said, I enjoyed Arkham City, but like you, Arkham Knight. Oh man,
Well, I wonder how much of Arkham Knight's problems come from it wasn't written by Paul Dini. Like, he was not involved with Arkham Knight like he was with
yeah,
Arkham Asylum and Arkham City. Because if you play those two games, he's definitely setting up for something.
yeah,
And then one of
absolutely,
us like, nope, we don't have we don't do what was it? They did some policy and said, nope, nope, can't write it. And then I guess they brought some other guy in and oof. Like, when you get
it
over halfway through the game and you see Scarecrow and you're like, oh yeah, that was the main villain.
right.
You got a problem.
There's Arkham Knight, and what frustrates me, it has some elements. See, if it was all bad, I could dismiss it,
Hmm.
and it's not all bad, which is what's frustrating. There's some good stuff in there. There's like the subplot that Batman is now hallucinating the Joker
Hmm.
as sort of his sidekick slash Jiminy Cricket is pretty brilliant. And some of Mark Hamill's best performances as the Joker are
Hmm.
in that subplot. It's great. Uh, but you keep having all these threads that don't really do anything. You severely weaken uh, Poison Ivy and her power and
Yeah.
agency. You also like you do this whole bait and switch where it looks like you've killed Barbara rather viciously, and then it turns out, oh, she's not dead. Like, okay, you know what? Between doing that and having basically a flashback to the Killing Joke, like
Yeah.
you're just sort of being mean at this point. Like there's nothing shocking about this. It's just cruel, and it didn't add to the story. It's
Hmm.
just Barbara. You don't hear about her for a while. Like,
Well,
and also we sort of did that. Oh, are they really dead? Play in a much more effective scene in Arkham Asylum with the
hmm.
Scarecrow and Jim Gordon. Um, it's and so there was a lot of there that just seemed to be there for flash or shock value. The Batmobile does not really work. Um,
What do you mean? The guy that doesn't use guns can't have a 50 cal tank?
yeah, anytime anyone tries to make like Batman Begins, I let them get away with it because of the style of that movie and because of how they used it in the first movie.
Hmm.
But other than that, anyone who tries to give Batman a tank as opposed to a car, I'm just like, I think you really missed the point of this. And also, it has to be functional. A tank will not drive through the streets of Gotham in any chase. Like,
Yeah.
nor is like Batman announcing his presence this much. Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
like I remember Sam Witwer, who was perfect for this because he plays Darth Maul in the Star Wars cartoons, and he also played Doomsday in Smallville.
Oh,
Uh,
don't bring up Smallville Doomsday.
Smallville is a mixed bag, but I thought like it's again like how they showed the creature wasn't thrilled by, but the idea of there being a human identity I actually thought was really cool and interesting, and gave Doomsday some depth. But either way, he was playing Arkham Knight, and he tweeted one night about like, man, driving this Batmobile around, I'm just and Man of Steel had just come out. And so he's driving the Batmobile around. It's like, man, driving this Batmobile around in Arkham Knight, I'm accidentally killing so many people. I feel like Superman. And I was like, oh my God, trash talk from Doomsday about Man of Steel. Oh,
yeah.
but yeah, Arkham Knight. Also, the ending. I'm not into endings that are just like weird for the sake of being weird. Like it's like, oh, well, it's supposed to symbolize. No, it symbolizes nothing. They just thought this would be a cool thing to make people wonder what it symbolizes, and that's not genuine.
They didn't give anything behind, and like it would have been different if it was like, okay, here's the ending, and then there's DLC that expands upon it. But then the DLC is just crap.
Yeah, and it's just it didn't have anything interesting to say about Batman, really. And you could have expanded it so much more. You could have the way that Arkham City had these DLCs where you play as Robin and Nightwing, which was okay. I wish they would have been integrated into the game. By Arkham Knight, you should have integrated them into the game. Holy crap.
Yeah, it was like in Arkham Knight, it was very much, okay, we need to have a reason to have Nightwing come up, so we can be like, oh, there's Nightwing, but then have a reason where Batman's like, no, you can't help me. I'm all alone. I'm all alone in my city. And
which at a certain point is actually antithetical to Batman. Batman is fine with working with agents and with working with teammates to a certain degree. He wants to be in charge.
Yeah, especially Dick Grayson.
Especially Dick Grayson. At this point in his life, where Dick's been Nightwing for a while, like, no, get the hell over yourself.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of frustration there. I actually have less frustration with Arkham Origins.
Yeah, not that bad.
Not that bad. I think Arkham Origins' biggest problem to me is that it didn't feel safe not having the Joker be the main villain. To the point where you're fighting Black Mask for a while, and I thought that was cool. And then it turns out, oh, Black Mask has been in prison. It's been the Joker the whole time. Like, well, that means nothing. Like, that doesn't make me go back in the earlier game like, oh, so I see that this meant this and this. No, it doesn't. It's just, it was Black Mask and then it wasn't. That's not really exciting. And
it also suffers the filler problem like anime does, when they want to give like the manga time to get ahead, so they go up and they make their own saves, but all the toys have to go back in the toy box before after its end, so it's like you can't really do anything.
Yeah, it's I mean, you could have explored it in different ways. You could have used some other villains that don't show up in Asylum, and so you or even also other characters that don't show up in Asylum, and so you can imply there's a dangerous stake here, or even if you just use it to give some insight into them. Like, I actually really liked the scenes with the Joker, where he's trying to size Batman up, and is really trying to figure out what this means. And although it meant they really rushed the Harley Quinn origin, I did sort of like that they had an aside where the Joker, you're playing as him through his delusions. As he's trying to explain what Batman means to him. Like, that was great. And again, so that's again why I still prefer Arkham Origins, because at least I can enjoy, you were trying to say something about these characters. And you weren't just like, this is how they first met. You wanted to explore why, when they first met, did the Joker become interested in this guy? Did the Joker start seeing him as my opposite number? You tried to answer that question, and I respect that. Arkham Knight just tried to say, how dark can we get this? And that's not a terribly interesting question to me. Not unless the darkness is to prove a theme, or for Batman to then be the light against the darkness. Like, then you have storytelling. If it's just, let's get as dark as possible. Guys, we're already in Gotham. Chill out.
Yeah, it's not like it's like Metropolis or something where you wanted to have it go dark and, Superman's the hope. But,
Yeah, but nonetheless, that series of games has changed, how we think about superhero games. And
Yeah.
now anytime someone brings up they should do a game on this character, they bring up, I would love to see an Arkham Asylum game about Superman. I would love to see an Arkham Asylum game with Wolverine, because we've been talking about the story, how much it brought about the story, but also the gameplay.
Yeah, they changed everything.
No, the gameplay was like the first time you felt like this is what it's like to fight as Batman.
Mm-hmm.
And also how much of it involved detective work of using his technology, scanning for clues, scanning for fingerprints, looking for this trail. That is, and stealth. How much of this involves stealth, which is Batman's key? Half of those levels were not, I must descend and kill all and like take all these people down. It was, I have to freak these people out, or I have to scare them.
When you scare the crap out of that last guy.
Yeah, like it's
awesome.
That's great, because again, that's getting into what Batman does as a character and part of why we like him. That he's not invincible, and so what he figures out is, how do I scare people into not being able to fight me? Or how do I use stealth and ninja tactics to take down 10 people in a locked room? And that's the stuff that we still talk about and really affected us, and which is now carrying over into the new Spider-Man game.